really excited and didn't even intro. This is Jaja Dore, and today I will be telling the story of the Bain family massacres.
So anyone that knows me knows that I'm a really morbid person. I find crimes and murders absolutely fascinating. Every day on my way to work I'll be watching some sort of twisted documentary or a YouTuber that is covering a murder case. So YouTubers that I love, I absolutely adore Ellen O'Neill, Bella Fiore I watch, Kendall Ray I think is great, and Georgia Marie I watch quite a lot as well. I was speaking to a friend at work about a year ago now, and he mentioned a case that I had never heard of, which was the Bain family massacre. I couldn't understand why I hadn't heard of this case, so it got me looking into a lot more cases that are probably not as well known or not as covered, and it's made me want to definitely have a go at bringing up the cases, talking about them on YouTube, just because it's something that I like to watch. Just a disclaimer, if I'm looking down it's because I'm looking at notes that I've made. So the murders took place on the 20th of June 1994. The family involved was a family of 6, father being Robin Bain, mother being Margaret Cullen Bain, and then 4 children. So the eldest of the 4 being David Bain. Next there was Arawa Bain, and then Laniette Bain, and the youngest son being Stephen Bain. So Margaret and Robin were both teachers, and missionary teachers, so they would travel a lot with their careers. And when David was just 2, he moved to Papua New Guinea from Dunedin to carry on with their teaching careers. And in Papua New Guinea, that's where Arawa was born, as well as Laniette and Stephen. Arawa, actually, the name, I looked into the name because I thought it was quite an unusual name, and I saw that it was a location in Papua New Guinea, so I wondered if that's why they might have called her that, or maybe she was born there. The whole family lived in Papua New Guinea, and the children were homeschooled, and then in 1988 the family then moved back to Dunedin, where Robin became a principal of a local school. So that's the background of the family. So we'll fast forward to 1994, the year that the murders happened. At this point, Margaret was 50 and Robin was 59. They were both teachers in a local school, Robin being the principal of the school. David, the eldest son, was studying classical music at university. He was 22 at this point, and on the side he had a paper round job just to earn some money. Arawa was 19 years old, and she was following the footsteps of her parents, and she was training to be a teacher in a college. Laniette is a funny one because online there's lots of conflicting information on what she was actually doing. So from what I could gauge online and from what I could find out, Laniette was 18 years old. Most of the time she spent away from home, so staying, I think, maybe with friends and renting an apartment in the city. It's also said that Laniette was struggling quite badly with drugs and alcohol, and she may have worked as a prostitute. I couldn't find out whether that was factual or not, but she was clearly going through a difficult time wherever it was that she was doing. So Stephen was 14, he was in high school and he played trumpet in the school band. He was known to be an absolute live wire, and he was also known to be incredibly talented when it came to music and instruments and playing the trumpet. So at the time that the murders happened, the household was quite disjointed. So Margaret and Robin had actually split, but they were still living on the same property. So Robin was living in a caravan in the garden and coming back into the house on the weekends, and then Margaret was living in the house with the children. But from what I could see online and what I read, it looked like the house was not looked after at all. You know, it looked derelict. On the 20th of June 1994 at 5:30 a.m, David, the eldest son, wakes up as he would usually, gets dressed and goes on his paper round with his dog. At 7:09 a.m. that same morning, he returns home to find that his family have been massacred and makes this call to the police.
They're all dead. I came home and they're all dead.
Whereabouts are you?
Every street.
Or every street?
65 every street. They're all dead.
Who's all dead?
My family, they're all dead, sorry.
So at 7:30 a.m. when police arrived at the scene, they discovered that all 5 members of David's family had been shot and killed. Arawa, Margaret and Laniette were all found dead in their beds in their bedrooms. Stephen was also found dead in his bedroom, but with obvious signs of struggle. And Robin Bain was found dead on the floor in the study with a computer switched on next to him with a note on screen that read, "Sorry, you are the only one that deserves to stay." So Arawa, Margaret and Laniette were all shot in their head while they were still sleeping in their bed. Stephen is thought that woke up and fought his attacker, so he was initially shot in the scalp. He then clearly fought off his attacker before being strangled and shot again in the head. And Robin was shot in the head at a very close range. 4 days later, on the 24th of June, David Bain was arrested and charged with 5 counts of murder for his family. So the original theory was that David woke up at 5 a.m, he loaded a rifle and attached a silencer. He then went into the rooms of his sister, mother and little brother and shot them all, changed his clothes, did his paper run, and then came back to turn on the computer and write the note on screen and wait for his father to come into the room before shooting him point blank. David was charged with 5 counts of murder and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years before parole. So David actually served 14 years in prison. He was then released on bail in 2007 and retried in 2009, where he was actually acquitted of all 5 counts of murder, so seen to be not guilty. So at this point, David is 37 years old. His whole family have been murdered, to which he went to prison for. Spent 14 years in prison knowing that his family are all dead. I can't imagine how that would feel. It really, really scares me when you read cases and you find that someone has gone down for something that they didn't do. David has always maintained his innocence. He said that he woke up at his usual time, which was about 5:30, got dressed, picked up his newspaper bag and then took his dog and did his paper run. When he came back, he got into the house, he changed his clothes and put his old clothes in the wash before realising that there was bullets on the floor. He then goes into his mother's room to find her dead initially. He can hear gurgling from Laniette's room and then walks into the room to see that she's also been shot and probably just about to die, and then calls the police. So David's defence attorney had actually proposed that Robin, the father, had murdered the entire family before typing the message on the screen and then committing suicide by shooting himself in the head, hence why it was close range. He initially appealed his case in 1995, which was rejected a year later. But part of me is thinking, why was the connection not made that the father had actually committed the crime back in 1994 when it happened? It was said that the motive that could have been for Robin to commit the crimes was that he found out about Laniette. Whether that was the fact that she was a sex worker, if that was the case, or maybe the drugs and so on. He was also clearly quite unstable at the time. He had hit a student at school, and he was going through a divorce. He was living in a caravan in his garden, and for anyone that's going through a divorce, it's a difficult time. So he was clearly very mentally unstable. In the original case, David's bloody fingerprints were found on a rifle. This was then tested in 2007 and the fingerprints did match David's, but the blood that was on the fingerprints on the rifle actually matched to that of an animal. So it could have been a rabbit that he'd hunted or some sort of animal that he'd shot when he'd gone hunting. The retrial in total lasted 3 months and then he was released in 2009. He is not being granted any compensation for going to prison. David now lives in Australia with his wife and 2 children. He actually lives now under the name of David Davis, just because he didn't want to carry on the name and instead took his wife's name. He has 2 children, a little boy and a little girl, and he named his little girl after Arawa, his sister that died. This case is so frustrating. Like, it just reminds me of the Stephen Avery case, and with whichever way you look at it, 5 innocent people lost their life, whether you see the 5 being his 5 family members or the 5th person actually being David. Like, he spent 15 years in prison after losing his entire family. So if you are morbid as hell like me and want to know more murders that are not covered necessarily online, please do like and subscribe, and I will be getting some more murder mysteries and murder cases to you soon. Bye!